Adebayo Alonge is my name. I'm the co-founder and CEO of RxAll. RxAll is an AI platform for real-time drug quality surveillance. And we build out this platform for drug regulators, especially in developing countries in Africa and Southeast Asia, to enable them track and trace drug quality across the supply chain. I survived a 21-day coma in Nigeria about 15 years ago, as a result of a fake drug. And that led me to become a pharmacist and to decide to eradicate this problem of falsified and substandard drugs. It's taken me over the last 15 years to work in the industry with Roche, Sanofi, BASF, and then as a strategy consultant with BCG, before going on to Yale, where I co-founded RxAll with two other Yale graduates as well. At the moment, our platform is currently operational in West Africa and in one country in Southeast Asia.
And it's been recognized quite a lot recently,
Yeah,
am I right?
so,
You're too modest to mention the awards.
Yeah, so we recently won the Hello Tomorrow Global Challenge in Paris 2 months ago. It's a deep tech challenge where there was, in this last year, over a 6 months period, we had 4,500 deep tech startups from 119 countries compete for this grand prize. And deep tech essentially is a combination of science-based technologies that have been scaled with digital programming, and we won that award.
I think that deserves a round of applause. That's fantastic stuff. So as you'll see from our discussion, you know, it's entitled digital, but we're looking at digital right through to deep tech and science. I'm going to go back to you, Pierre, just to hear a little bit more about what you're doing. If we're talking about digital being part of any solution, the kids you're working with, I mean, they've so many deprivations. You might just tell us a little bit more about the kind of kids and their backgrounds, and how the fact that they're not even at school, you were telling me. So you might tell us a little bit more about them, and you might also tell me, can digital help in any way? I mean, can it potentially pull them out of the poverty circle that they're in?
Yes, to answer your question, I need to tell you a little bit more. You're right about those kids. Most of them arrived in France back 5 to 10 years ago. They went to school because school is compulsory and school is good. But actually, all of them have quit when they were 13 or 14, although school is compulsory. So, but school is really not for them. They have so difficulties. They could not catch up the language gap and everything. So the teachers don't succeed in managing them. So and they feel so alone. They are so much behind the rest of the class that they move away. They drop from school, and so what do? Not much actually, and they often very quickly they have problems with justice. They've got and they do a little bit of drug trafficking, and it's true they're on a very bad trajectory. So how digital can help them? That's a question you are asking. Two things. First of all, those kids they really need at school. It's not doing anything, not going anywhere. At home, it's difficult as well because parents. We're working with the parents, the whole family. Are struggling so much. There is no resources, or very little, the minimum, the social minimum. So what they need is really support, human support. So we are a team of 15, and we do spend a lot of time connecting with them, just connecting with them, listening, discussing, and doing anything. Again, could be sports, could be music, anything that is of interest to them, but one issue they have that's true, and it's part of the isolation, loneliness issue they have, is that access to the internet is actually a problem for them. Even in a country like France, it's very complicated. You can steal a phone, but you cannot steal a SIM card. So they all have phones. They have phones, but they don't have SIM cards. And there is no internet box at home. So what they do, because they do use social media as any teenager you can, of course, they're very good at that, actually. What they do is they go in the street, they find a hot spot, they sit in the street and they surf on the internet. So, and they would spend the night, actually, surfing on the internet in the street. So this is the first issue we need to solve if we think about how digital can help those kids. First of all, they should get the right of getting access to the internet as all other kids in the country and beyond. Then what digital solutions can help? I'm sure that I will not mention all the good examples of the digital jobs that are actually accessible even for the most fragile if they are well trained. There are many strong examples around the world. I will not recall that without digital you cannot just find a job. And you cannot even get access to the basic rights. For the parents, everybody knows about this divide. To get your rights, to get a home, to get your heads, and to get health support, to take a rendezvous, a meeting, you need to go on the internet, and it's very difficult. Now, we just mentioned one example that I found really great. It's a platform that is called Singa. Some of them know that. It's a platform that enables, it's a media, social media actually, that enables people to set up an event. It can be a football game or it can be a dinner at home where migrants, mostly migrants, would register together with non-migrants, people from France, and these events are fantastic opportunities to actually reach up together, build connection, and discuss opportunities. Okay, yeah, I'm coming from Ghana. I was trained as a I don't know, electrician, and I'm looking for a job. Okay, I'm French. I'm based in Paris. I may have ideas to help you. Very informal discussion. And Singa has had a huge success over the last 3 years. It's hundreds of thousands of people that are connected every day, mostly migrants, and I think it's a good way. It's very emblematic of what digital can do. It cannot do. Robots will not kill extreme poverty. It's people. It's the engagement of the civil society that is really core to the solution, I think. But digital solutions are very useful, extremely powerful for actually scaling up the small initiatives that are burgeoning everywhere. It's really powerful.
And just before I move on, I mean, as you say, they're digital tools, like they're just something to an end. But you were talking about ATD as the organization that you're involved in, and they were involved in, I think, a home being a human right. Did I understand that correctly? Were they involved in a home becoming a human right?
Yeah. Actually, we are a very political organization. Yeah. So all we are doing, and what I'm doing is actually an experimentation, aims at understanding what is not working well, to be able to formulate propositions for change of regulations. So you're right, one example is DALO, Droit à un logement opposable. It's a French right that has been existing for a couple of years in France, that guarantees, theoretically, because practically it's difficult to implement, but theoretically guarantees that everybody can have a home. And this typically was the result of experimentations and analysis were done by this organization, and then that were brought to the level of the state.
Because, I mean, surely access to digital for these kids should be a human right.
It could be right. I think it will be discussed at one session tomorrow. Absolutely, the right to digital access could be one of the fundamental rights of the new world. Yeah.
That brings me on beautifully to W4, Lindsey, because one of the things, and it's something I look at a lot myself, when you travel around the world, poverty tends to affect women very strongly in some of the developing and the developed countries, but also they tend to be the ones who don't have the digital skills that they need for employability or, the better jobs. And I think that's something, am I right, that would be quite close to your heart and something you're working on?
Yeah, Absolutely. So to say actually one of the main activities of W4 is providing girls and women from underprivileged backgrounds, often in highly challenging contexts, with access to digital skills training ranging from basic digital skills or digital literacy right the way through to specialized IT training and coding to facilitate their access to the formal employment sector and also to promote women's tech-based entrepreneurship. But when we take this question of how digital can reduce poverty if we work at it, you know, at W4 we feel we are convinced that this question is one of the most important questions we can be asking ourselves at this time. We have to really focus on if we work at it. We're here in a world where we do have a digital divide that is, you know, the UN has described as risks becoming a digital chasm. You know, if you look at the UN global broadband progress reports, and you also have this digital gender divide that often, as you say, actually today it's the majority of digitally excluded people on the planet, bearing in mind that, you know, it's close to half the world population doesn't have access to internet, so let's remember that's the starting point. Well, the majority are girls and women, hence why I came to be working on W4. I maybe just want to say how I fell into working in W4 because I think it's a great example. I was working in the humanitarian sector several years ago, working in the Philippines archipelago, and it was working with communities living in slum areas and also working with communities living in cemeteries. It was actually the first time I'd ever worked with communities living in cemeteries. And we were managing educational programs enabling, focusing on girls and women again, because it was, from poor communities, they tend to be most at risk of being out of school, you may already know this, and most at risk to certain social dangers or social harms. We were getting the girls into school, getting them into secondary school, they were doing brilliantly, getting them into college, so to university, and what we observed was that they were doing brilliantly. Their academic qualifications were necessary but not a sufficient condition to enable them to access safe formal employment, and what we observed was they needed digital skills. So we set up an IT training center, and sure enough, when we provided these girls and young women with IT skills, it translated into a higher success rate of these girls obtaining employment. And then we had an epiphany and thought, well, here we are in the Philippines, so it's a middle-income country with, you know, a lot of extreme poverty, but one of the biggest drivers of the Philippines economy was and remains today the IT business process management sector. And we were like, okay, well, what if we train them, we provide them with more advanced IT skills? So we did. And of course, that then translated into enabling these young women to access a variety of jobs. I think the main point is that as we move forward in our increasingly digitalized societies and economies, you know, the majority of jobs, and we're not just talking about the specialist IT jobs being, I don't know, a coder or a database administrator, etc. We're talking about a whole range of jobs. The majority of jobs will require digital skills. When it comes to reducing poverty, obviously through employment, through economic empowerment, well, yes, that's a way for us to address this issue of poverty. And then, you know, this can translate at the macro level into wonderful benefits, everything from boosting economic prosperity and across the board to sustainable, inclusive development. And I'm deliberately avoiding the word growth because we now need to be thinking about being in a post-growth world. So, yeah. And observing that, as you can imagine, observing that in a cemetery when you see up close that you can break the intergenerational cycle of poverty and you can bring about systemic change, you don't forget that. And we're seeing that all around the world in different countries.
Yeah, can I just add in there? So there's a recent world organization, the IMF report, that stated that in Africa alone, if the government's focused on digital transformation, we can actually bring about 4.3 million people out of poverty every year. And we can also add into the economy of Africa as a whole over $43 billion every year. This translates to about 2% in GDP growth. And forgive me, I'm using the word growth, but it translates to about 2% in GDP growth annually. in Africa. So there are studies that are in there done by multilateral agencies like the IMF, the World Bank, that show specific numbers as to how digital transformation can actually drive economic growth. So I just came in from Lagos overnight, and what was very clear to me in terms of talking with some of the Uber drivers there on what their monthly incomes look like, they're making 10 times the minimum wage in Nigeria. That's about $1,000 just driving Uber full-time, 12 hours over 6 days, versus traditional workers who earn around $100 working as white-collar workers in civil service or in the private sector. So there are very clear indications about how digital transformation can drive the economy, can improve equity as well in terms of overall income levels for marginalized portions and underemployed people in developing countries.
They're fascinating figures. I'm just wondering, things like Uber, are there any risks there? Are they displacing other people's taxi jobs or anything like that?
Yes.
You know, it's been a challenge everywhere else. Is it a challenge in Lagos that you're aware? Or?
Yes, it is a big issue. So that actually leads to a situation where you have taxi drivers pulling and beating up Uber drivers out of a ride. You also have situations where Uber drivers are not allowed to work in the airport because there's no way for the federal government of Nigeria to earn taxes from the airport rides. So there is obviously some level of disruption to traditional industries that Uber sort of typifies. But I think what is very, very clear with digital, especially in developing markets, is that it's a channel to improve equity, right? Because when you would normally pay a monopoly of taxi drivers 4 times what it should be worth with Uber, it closes out that market space to other people that Uber has now brought into that market, and even drop down the prices of the traditional taxi market, even making people who don't have cars lower their expenses on transportation. Most middle class, lower middle class professionals in Lagos now don't even bother having a car or using the poor public transport system. They just order an Uber and they can move around.
It has become that pervasive?
Yes, it's become pervasive that way.
As you're talking about risks regarding digital, I see one risk, that is digital as much as human being. Digital, I'm thinking about big data and artificial intelligence. As much as human being can be very unfair and inhuman. I have 2 examples that really have stricken me recently. The first one is coming from the US. There were statistics on the risk of recidivism of people in jail, depending on social and ethnic origin. And it showed that if you're black, the risk of recidivism is much higher than if you're white. The result is, in some states of the US, judges now, when they have to decide on the duration of the jail sentence, you guess what they do. They have a bias. That is, they tend to maintain the black longer in jail based on those statistics. Personally, I find it very unfair. Second example is in France. There is something that is put in place to support the very fragile young. It's called the Guarantee Jeune. For 1 year, you get a little bit of financial aid against a commitment to work on finding training and a job. And at the very beginning, the idea was really to support the most fragile of the children. And then there was this natural intent to improve productivity. And so they set targets to these teams in charge of distributing these aids, targets in terms of a rate of success. And the result is that the teams are now selecting the kids based on what they believe brings higher chances of success. And the most fragile are naturally put on the side, which is very short-term viewed, because long-term, those most fragile are the ones who will cost the most to the society if we don't support them. They will cost in terms of just violence, justice, and so on. So I don't mean that digital is more or less inhuman than human beings, but it can be. And so we need to be very careful about how we leverage digital for decision making.
Absolutely, and funnily enough, it's something we're going to be involved in discussing tomorrow around artificial intelligence and the biases that can damage people. Absolutely, no, it's interesting. Do you see any risks when you're...
Of course.
As we're talking about it.
No, of course, and we'll be discussing these issues tomorrow when we talk about, one of the themes of a session tomorrow is do we need a declaration of digital rights? If we can get excited about the potential of technology, digital, to reduce poverty, on the one hand we can, and it's quite dizzying when you see this vast array of ways that digital is being harnessed to improve people's safety and improve their financial well-being and their health, and wherever we could go on for hours just listing, from e-learning, e-agriculture, mobile microfinance to mobile finance, artificial intelligence being used to support refugees and immigrants. We could just go on and on. Well, we can get excited about that, but we have to bear in mind that it always goes hands in hands with the protection of rights and ensuring protections in the digital space too. So of course we're seeing it. And when it comes to the subject of girls and women, we can talk about the digital gender divide in terms of girls and women constituting the majority of people who are least likely to have access to technologies or least likely to have the skills. But globally, we have a real problem of a digital gender divide in terms of the paucity of women in the tech sector, which is leading to these self-perpetuating biases and lots of risks and even dangers. So, and then that's a whole other conversation we could have. So yes.
That answers my question. I'm going to come back to you for a minute because I want to hear a little bit more about, because we only touched on it yet, the deep tech that you're using and why it is so important. You told me some frightening figures, which I'm going to let you share rather than me. But when it comes to fake medications, now, I mean, we even in Ireland, you have the issue. I think it might be nearly 10% of medicines that are bought online are fakes, etc. But in places like Africa, it can be massive. Tell us a little bit about what the problem is and exactly what your technology has done to solve it.
Yeah, so I'll just define some very important terms that I'll be using as I answer that question. The first is the definition of what a falsified drug is. So a falsified drug is any medication that has lied about its composition and its source, and also about what has been used to make it. A substandard drug is one that has come from a licensed manufacturer, but actually has not met the standard specification for which it has been produced against. The big numbers that we have from the WHO study in 2017 put about 10% of all the medicines in the world as falsified, and also puts the number in Africa as up to 30% of the medicines that have been falsified. In some certain countries, like especially the ones that are in the central part of Africa, you have between 50 to 70% of the medicines that are falsified. So these are big numbers overall, and it's a $200 billion industry that is currently 8 times more lucrative than the narcotics business. Now, if we go outside of the economic piece here, we talk about the human numbers. I was lucky to have survived the 21-day coma that I faced. Across the world, we have 1 million people who die every year because of complications from falsified and low-quality medications. In Africa alone, we have 250,000 children that die from complications as a result of poorly treated malaria and pneumonia, and over 100,000 adults who die from other conditions due to poor quality medicines. So this is the human toll that falsified and substandard drugs bring to the world. Specifically in Africa, the reason why this problem is so huge is because we have a situation where we have very weak regulatory systems that have to deal with medications that are coming mostly from India and China. Now, in Africa, 70% of all the medicines are imported. And Africa just has about 30% local manufacturing capacity. And so what this has meant is that you have weak regulatory systems that now have to deal with so much transnational trade in medications, and they don't have the ability to do so. 90% of all healthcare spending in Africa is done out of pocket. And so what this means for people is that price is the major driver of purchase decisions around medicines. And so this creates a huge demand condition for low-priced medicines, which are often of very low quality. And in my own case, the chemist who sold the medication that almost killed me got a $5,000 fine. The other alternative was a 5-year jail sentence. And this is even in Nigeria that has the strictest laws around fake medicines. So this tells you that it's a business that is very lucrative and also has very weak legal repercussions. So this is the situation. These are the reasons why we have the dumping of bad medications in Africa. Now, what we have done with RxAll is that we realized that what we needed to provide was the tool to enable regulators on the continent to be able to effectively monitor the drug supply chain system. And so what we call ourselves is a deep tech company because we have used a core science principle around spectroscopy. It's been a technology that has been available for over 50 years. The difference is that we miniaturized the sensor and programmed it so it's possible to actually do all of the scans in the cloud and distribute the results in real time across different parts of the supply chain so the regulators can see where the bad quality medicines are showing up by location, by brand, by expiry date, by lot numbers. And they can then tie in that into the WHO's GSMS system, which is a sort of global surveillance monitoring system. And it prioritizes those drugs that have also been identified in surrounding countries so that the regulator can take very quick action to pull the medicines out of the system. In addition, unlike before when we showed up in the market, when regulators see a bad medicine, what happens is that they put an alert on their website. Hardly anybody reads these things on the website. Now, with our solution, they can actually send a recall directly to all the pharmacies in the country and ask them to pull the medicines off the shelf. In addition, patients can actually write directly to the regulator and say, I saw this bad drug here. This is the name of the pharmacy that's selling it. Go in there and seize it. And so this is where we have interfaced digital on top of what was traditionally a lab-based process, where in the past, the regulators would send the drug samples into a lab, do the analysis, and then decide the next course of action. Now, in real time, they actually can see all of the level of quality of all the medicines in their country and take effective action faster. So this is what we're doing at RxAll as a deep tech company.
It's an amazing example of how technology can actually fix a big problem like that in a country like that. Because I'm assuming, again, it's the poorest and, well, the middle classes and the poorest who end up being affected by false...
So I was telling a gentleman earlier today that I know a Nigerian businessman that imports sandwiches every morning on British Airways because he doesn't want to get food poisoning in Lagos. Right, and so it's just a reflection of like how like the class divide affects the poor. Right, the very rich actually can travel to Dubai or London to get healthcare. Yeah. They can import the next batch of medicine on the next flight coming into the country. But the poor and the middle class mostly are mostly left to what is available in the pharmacies locally.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I mean, even in so-called developed countries, it is often the people with the least who end up getting hit by these things, you know, by things like the dodgy medicines, etc. We've actually very little time left. Is there anybody who wants to come in with a question? I have a few more things I can ask, but God, is there a microphone there? A question here? The time has flown by. Could you just tell us who you are first?
Hi, I'm Agathe. I'm a student in Sciences Po in Paris. So you said that digital transformation can drive the economy and maintain equity, like drive equity. How do you make sure that it doesn't leave people behind like it has done in developed countries? So how do you make sure that it is a fair process, basically?
Yes. Oh, was it addressed to me? Okay. Okay. So as the other panelists mentioned earlier, digital is just one set of tools that you use to solve the poverty crisis in the world. I think what is very critical is the role of the state or the public system to create the policies around the rights of individuals in a digital world, and specifically around what it means for equity to be defined when digital is deployed. I think one country that does this very well is Canada, right, where they say, we know that digital is going to displace this number of people from their jobs, and they're providing second career funding options. The government actually is paying people to go back to school to learn new skills that will keep them either at their current place of work or to find new jobs in the new digital economy. So there is a central role for the state, the government, to play in terms of defining where they want their countries to go in the digital realm, and specifically what the rights and the protections should look like for people in their countries.
I want to bring Pierre in here as well, but I know, Lindsey, you wanted to...
Well, to echo also what you were saying, Adebayo, just say, so if I can stay on the subject of women, for example, you've probably noticed a lot of governments nowadays are talking about women's empowerment and getting more women into the labor market. So we know it's this huge economic opportunity, and you may have heard of the, this headline-grabbing report by McKinsey, The Power of Parity. Like, it's $12 to $28 trillion, I think, annually in global GDP by 2025 if we can get more women into the formal labor market. And so, okay, that's all really very exciting. And what we know is that to do that, we're going to need to ensure that those women have digital skills, either through investing in skills in the education system or through upskilling in terms of digital skills if we want to capture that. But it goes even further in, when it comes to the subject of women's economic empowerment, for example. Digital is a really powerful catalyst for gender equality, so between men and women. And by promoting that, that brings with it a whole host of really positive, development impacts, results. Everything from, if you look at the main challenges that we're facing today, everything from, addressing climate change and ensuring environmental protection to combating extremism, peace, stability, all of these things, we've seen that SDG 5, so empowering women, is really at the core of that. And digital can be a very, very forceful lever to achieve that. However, as you said, that means we have to get it right. We're at a possible turning point, but we have to get it right. And it ties in with what you're saying, is we have to make the right investments and make them now.
And I mean, it's something that I was talking with you guys about earlier when we were chatting, and I just want to bring you in, Pierre, there, is that idea of whose responsibility is to ensure that, okay, is there any excuse for not ending poverty in the world as we know it, whether it's digital, whether it's health poverty? Whose responsibility is it? We were asking, is it governments? Is it, private sector? Is it individuals? What are we getting wrong, and what do we need to do, and who needs to do it, in your view, Pierre? Big question.
Yeah, before answering this one, I will just tackle once again this question of that lady. There is this very pessimistic view that was not mentioned, that the world is really very much siloed. There is a rich, the poor, and even in rich countries, people live, the two camps live on their side. So you would live in the center of Paris, you would have a very high level of resources, and 10 kilometers away, or less than 10 kilometers, you've got 40% of the population that is living with very, very low resources. And technology, actually, there is, in this pessimistic view, is technology, especially high technology, is really, we cannot afford, the world cannot afford these high technologies for everybody, for one reason being the lack of resources, natural resources. You know what an iPhone is consuming in terms of earth, rare earths and everything. I believe in progress, and I'm not on this side, but there is this challenge we need to tackle, that to make sure that this high-tech thing is really it benefits to everybody, and doesn't nurture this very pessimistic vision where you've got a few that is getting even always richer, and the poor remain stuck at the bottom of the pyramid.
Listen, our time is up. I can't believe it. It went by so quickly. These three amazing people will be around, so be sure to catch them and ask them questions. I'm sure you don't mind, do you, if people stop you, accost you in the hall and ask you questions. I want to say a huge thank you to our speakers, Lindsey, Pierre and Adebayo here.